Okay, so while testing this laptop, I was pretty sure I would finish the review with the conclusion that this is overall a solid, mediocre laptop, and I didn't mean this in a negative way considering the price it starts at, but then I discovered the insane CPU throttling issue it has, and I had to basically retest all my benchmarks and kinda rewrite this review. So, take everything I say today with a grain of salt, and now let's talk about that. Today's specific model is the ACER Aspire 5A515-57G, which comes with the following hardware. An Intel i7 1260p with unacceptable throttling issues, which can be fixed to some extent, though. More about that later. A low-power 25-watt version of the new RTX 2050 by NVIDIA, 16GB of DDR4 RAM with considerably slow 3200 MHz, a very fast 1TB NVMe SSD by Micron with up to 3GB per second of reading and writing speed, a 15-inch Full HD matte IPS display with 60Hz, a 50Wh battery, and a small 90-watt charger as well as Wi-Fi 6. And if you're getting the version without Windows and only 512GB of SSD space, you can get this laptop for around $800 euros, depending on where you live. This specific version does cost around 1,200 though, which I personally would consider way too much for what you're getting. First up, let's start with the laptop's mediocreness. Is that a word even? Mediocrity? Well, the chassis is made out of aluminum, but it's not as sturdy as it should be. On some areas, it's just too flexible, especially for the higher priced models, in my opinion. It is possible to open the laptop with one hand, kind of, and it has a total height of 18mm when closed and only weighs 1.8 kg. The display is overall providing clear and colorful images with a good and equal black without any light spots. But the color ranges aren't good, but yeah, you've guessed it, pretty mediocre. With around 275 nits, the brightness is absolutely okay for indoor work, but absolutely not bright enough for using the laptop outside on a sunny day, unless you're maybe using it in a cave. The illuminated keyboard was working fine for me, but it doesn't feel more than okay. I can't complain about the touchpad and the integrated fingerprint sensors as well. The connection options are actually pretty good. On the left side we are getting a gigabit LAN port, an HDMI port, 2 USB 3 ports and a USB-C port with Thunderbolt and DisplayPort support. On the right side we are getting another USB 3 port and a 3.5mm audio jack, so I have absolutely no complaints in that matter, except for the very thin power plug that ACER choose to use. This might actually become an issue if you accidentally put too much force on it. But before we continue with the review, I have to talk about the power throttling issues the Intel i7 actually has. Under full load, after a short boost time, the provided power the CPU can use is heavily reduced to around 12 watt, and the CPU clock is throttling to very low 1.2 to 1.5 GHz. In games, this will cause most modern games to become absolutely unplayable, as the stuttering is really annoying, and even 3D applications or video editing will suffer noticeably by this issue. Luckily, I was able to fix this after spending hours of research and updates. So finally, after updating the BIOS and using the free app Throttle Stop, I was able to reduce the throttling enough to allow games to run faster and other apps to use more CPU power if necessary. In this picture you can see the option that you'll need to activate. By the way, the temperatures are still fine after doing this, the CPU won't run too hot. In consequence, it seems that in games the GPU would use a little less power, but the overall FPS and the stability were improved by a lot. I don't know if ACER is ever going to fix this, but I surely hope they will do that soon. Now let's finish the rest of the review with this limitation in mind. Now the laptop does offer 3 performance modes, silent, balanced, performance, which affect performance and fan speed. You can switch between them by pressing Fn plus F at the same time, which is not advertised anywhere. I discovered it by coincidence, and the ACER Care Center does not have these options either. The maximum loudness, even under full load in performance mode, is pretty acceptable in my opinion. The fans never completely stop running even in the silent / battery saving mode though. And from time to time I actually experienced some very faint coil whine. which definitely shouldn't happen. The maximum temperatures of CPU and GPU are absolutely fine at room temperatures of 22 degrees Celsius. The keyboard does get warm, but it's not getting hot or uncomfortable. The overall sound quality of the speakers is alright, but it's clearly lacking loudness.
By the way, this is what the integrated camera looks like and what the integrated microphone sounds like.
Oh, and I forgot to mention that it's possible to add a second M.2 SSD, as there is a free slot available on the mainboard if you open the laptop. The battery lasts up to 13 hours and 45 minutes on idle with 20% brightness, Wi-Fi and activated battery saving mode, with the i7 using only 3.5 watts on average. Watching YouTube at 50% brightness using headphones at 20% loudness resulted in a runtime of 6 hours and 15 minutes. When gaming on battery, the laptop shuts down after around 60 to 70 minutes if you're not using any FPS restrictions. But I have to point out that the gaming performance in most games on battery is only around 10% slower than when it's plugged in. The ACER Care Center offers a battery conservation mode, by the way. It's not possible to set one in the BIOS though, so Linux users might not be able to use it. You can't set any power or performance settings in the BIOS, by the way. And you can charge around 35% in 30 minutes. After fixing the throttling issue in Cinebench R23, the laptop scored 9,822 points in the multi-core and 1,742 points in the single-core test. On battery, I was getting around 6,259 in the multi-core and 1,548 points in the single-core test. In PC Mark 10, I was getting a score of 6,324 using the performance mode, a score of 5,449 on battery using the performance mode, and a score of 4,198 using the silent/battery saving mode while the laptop was plugged in. In Geekbench, I was getting a multi-core score of 8,870 for the ACER Aspire 5 and a single core of 1,715. In Blender 3.2.1, the Chunkshop demo file took 1 minute and 54 seconds to render on the GPU and 1 minute and 38 seconds on the CPU. The Classroom file was rendered in around 2 minutes and 22 seconds on the GPU and 10 minutes and 10 seconds on the CPU. The built-in dedicated RTX 2050 is a cut-down variant of the RTX 3050. It can boost up to 35 watt in some games due to dynamic boost. And keep in mind that most games won't be playable like at all without the throttle stop adjustment, unless Acer is going to fix this anytime soon. Now, I've made a dedicated video with 10 games using this specific laptop, so make sure to check that out afterwards, and I will post it in the end card and the description of this video. But we're going to take a quick preview at 3 games now anyway. I was playing Forza Horizon 5 on medium settings at 1080p and saw an average of around 80 FPS and a 1% low of 66 FPS, which definitely qualifies as perfectly playable. You could actually use high settings and cap the FPS at 60 to optimize the visuals. The game ran really great and I would call this a perfect experience. In Cyberpunk 2077, I was using the low preset with DLSS on balanced mode at 1080p, resulting in an average of 50 FPS with a 1% low of 32. Frame times were pretty good almost all the time, and I would definitely call this enjoyable. You could surely crank up some more settings and still get away with more than 30 FPS. Considering that this game is really eating performance in modern gaming PCs, I'd call this a respectable result overall. And remember to always double check traffic when crossing a street, children. Thanks, next. I was using the Pro settings in Fortnite, meaning epic view distance and everything else set to the lowest at 1080p and DirectX 11, even though the performance mode is of course an option as well. However, I saw an average of 74 FPS with a 1% low of 33 FPS, which surely could be optimized if you play 2 or 3 matches until the game loaded all the shaders, etc, at least once. From my experience, that definitely helps. Keep in mind that Fortnite is actually getting more demanding with almost each season though. At least it has been like that for the last few years, as it was absolutely possible to get 120 FPS with these settings on a GTX 750 Ti and a 10-year-old 4-core i5 a few years back. So it's safe to say that you can absolutely play every game out there with at least 30 FPS or more on Full HD. Most games actually run with 60 FPS or more depending on the graphics settings. The ACER Aspire 5 is not a bad laptop in general. If you can get it for a cheap price like $800 or less, I'd say it's fine to get one depending on what else you could choose. Don't pay premium though, as other laptops might get you a much better price to performance ratio and a better build quality. I mean, in general, it is a fast laptop for everyday use. You can even use it for lighter 3D or video editing. And it can play every existing game out there, at least to this date. In an okay way for casual gamers, that is. It is thin and it's light, and the battery times are okay, even though they are nothing special. But the throttling issue is a real issue as of now, and I really hope that ACER is going to fix it ASAP. If they do, it will become a much better overall package, as it is a solid, even though, you guessed it, mediocre laptop. And I actually don't mean that in a cruel way. That's all for today. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to like and or subscribe. Thank you very much, see you next time, take care, bye bye and tschüss.